Good afternoon, everyone. Budjeri Gamarua. I commence today's webinar with a greeting from the Gadigal people, the traditional custodians of the land which I am calling from today. In the Gadigal language, it simply means g'day, and I want to extend the acknowledgement to all the traditional custodians of the lands that you all come from and you're all calling from today. I'm Met Chan, and I lead McDonald's Energy Advisory Practice in Australia. So over the next hour, we'll be providing you with an update on the CER data exchange co-design consultation process. I'll be joined by my colleagues Alex Bortolussi and Craig Chambers, as well as Nick Regan and Rachel Rodriguez-McGowan from AEMO. We've also got on the call here Anoop Nambiar from AusNet Services. So just a bit of housekeeping before we start. So you may have realised that we have recorded this webinar. So for the benefit of those who aren't able to attend, this will be placed on the AEMO website as well as the slides after we finish today. A few more housekeeping. We will have a question and answer session right at the end of today's webinar. So please hold your question till then. We are using the Teams function for the first time, but for those of you who've been in other webinars, we have the function for you to upvote questions throughout the process. If we don't get to your question today, please feel free to email us at the email address there, cerdataexchange@aemo.com.au, and one of us will get in touch with you. We do have a big crowd today. We're at 127 now, so really, really pleased to see so many of you here today. Next slide, please. So what have we got today? We've got quite a few things to talk you through. We will take you through the overview of the consultation activities to date. We will then cover a summary of the submissions. We will take you through what the preferred option going to be, and then the next step for 2025, followed by a Q&A session. I'm now going to hand over to Nick Regan from AEMO to make a few opening remarks.
Thanks, Ed. Hi everyone, I'm Nick Regan. I'm a business lead in AEMO's DER Reform Delivery Area. I was leading this project up until the drafting of the consult paper, which since then the project's been in the hands of my colleague Rachel, who's in a far better position to take you through all the great feedback we've got to date. But I just wanted to, before we hand it over to Rach, thank ARENA for their grant that's made this co-design project possible, and say obviously that the views we express here today aren't the views of the government or ARENA, they're actually yours. And so I wanted to thank all of you, just personally from me, everyone who's collaborated with us in this process over the last 6 months. Thank you very much. It's been a really good learning experience all round, and I think collectively we've covered a lot of ground and a lot of depth. So thank you. Sit back, enjoy the webinar. Hopefully there's lots of great questions, and with that, Rach, I'll hand to you to take us through the co-design activities today.
Thanks, Nick, and good afternoon, everyone. Through the next few slides, I'll walk through an overview of our consultation activities to date and the steps we've taken in the co-design process so far. I just want to highlight this project is part of a much broader journey within the energy transition. In stage one, we looked at CER integration trials, and the evidence from these trials demonstrated the value of a CER data exchange approach. This evidence, along with international case studies, built a strong case for change, and the time to act was now. This initiative has also been recognised in the government's national CER roadmap, and we want to take this forward with industry's input. We're at stage two at the moment, the co-design collaboration. We deliberately took this step to collaborate with industry on the high-level design and implementation roadmap for a CER data exchange to ensure that what is designed and implemented delivers the maximum value for all consumers, but also brings value to industry. Now that we have industry's preference on a preferred option based on the stakeholder feedback that we'll walk through in the webinar, we're going to work on the final part of the co-design project, and that will be a high-level design, an implementation roadmap, a cost assessment, and a knowledge sharing report. All of these outputs will then be used to progress to a separate implementation initiative in stage 3. As Nick mentioned, Together, we have undertaken an impactful co-design process over the past 6 months, and industry has made a significant contribution to this project and has shaped this reform. On behalf of the project team, I want to thank everyone for their continual interaction and time and engagement that they have given with us. It has been amazing to see the level of detail stakeholders have gone through in this co-design process, so we can't thank you enough for that. Some of the stakeholder engagements highlights we've had so far is we've had 170 people at 2 in-person workshops across Melbourne and Sydney. We've received 23 detailed submissions to our consultation paper from a broad cross-section of industry, and we've held 9 expert working group meetings. Stakeholders have committed their time and worked with the project team to think through all the various aspects of this data exchange, whether they be the technical elements, a governance framework, or the commercial requirements. Without the quality of these interactions, our project would not have progressed to this phase. So we sincerely thank you very much for all the time that you've given us. The feedback that we've received to date has been incredibly important as we move to outline the preferences for a CER data exchange. The stakeholders' considerations that we've received has gone through an iterative process and development to continually refine the material, stress test this with the EWG, and then take this to the wider stakeholder group for feedback through the workshops. Our initial feedback that we heard was develop the scope of the high-level design and make sure we understand the importance of all the different organisational perspectives. We took this feedback and then we went into workshop 1. In workshop 1, we heard that it must benefit the consumers, focus on the quick wins, have careful management of consumer information if it's required, and the access rights, but most importantly, the design must have an end state in mind. With all of this feedback, we further refined it and incorporated it into the materials for workshop 2. In workshop 2, we heard some similar feedback from stakeholders, and they were, let's focus on the priority use cases, which are sharing network limits, supporting local network support services, and consistent CER standing data. We also heard keep the narrow focus, so focus on quick wins, and of the operation and ownership models we heard, the AEMO IDX extension was the preferred model for most of these use cases. And with the preferred model, have a balanced oversight approach. The feedback we received from workshop 2 was the broadest we'd received so far, and all of it fed into our consultation paper to produce our industry preferred option. If you'd like to read more about these workshops and all the feedback and the trade-offs we discussed, the summary reports are on the AEMO CER Data Exchange website. I'll now hand over to my colleague, Alex Bortolucci, who'll walk through the detailed submission based on the feedback we've heard. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Rachel. So in October, we released the consultation paper, and in this section, what we're going to do is we're going to summarise the key themes, stakeholder sentiments, and a bit of the feedback that we received in the submissions. In case you're interested in diving deeper into what the submission said, we've got both the consultation summary report and copies of the submissions that we received up on the AEMO webpage. We'll provide a link to that after the session. And if you have any questions that you come across in the submissions and you'd like to send them to us at a later date, we're happy to, as Ed mentioned, answer them through the CER Data Exchange email. So the consultation paper was a key milestone to confirm both industry preferences and the feedback that we'd received to date. As Rachel mentioned, it didn't start from a blank slate though. It took into account feedback from numerous other engagements, distilled and consolidated the sentiments from 2 public workshops, numerous one-on-one consultation sessions, and 9 expert working group meetings. The paper presented straw person options that were shaped by these previous engagements and for the purpose of operationalising what a CER data exchange would look like. Across 5 main chapters, we consulted on use case functionality, data sharing capabilities, ownership, operations and oversight, data governance and implementation considerations. And we asked stakeholders 20 questions throughout the consultation paper seeking their input. Overall, we received 23 submissions from across the supply chain, from networks, retailers, aggregators, industry associations, research, tech providers and advisors. We'd like to thank all stakeholders for their submissions, and we're grateful for the level of input the extent of the feedback and the time and the effort that every stakeholder put into this, especially considering the numerous concurrent reforms occurring at the moment, and with almost all stakeholders provided responses to all 20 questions, which we're very grateful for. In the following slides, we'll provide further detail on the themes and the stakeholder sentiments expressed in the submissions, but at a high level, the consultation submissions demonstrated broad support to progress the CER data exchange as a key reform initiative. Further to this, submissions feedback provided us with a clear progression to progress, and in some aspects, we reached consensus. This was, for example, on a clear preference for a phased implementation approach, which was to start small and grow, and in doing so, learn from the implementation of each use case and adapt accordingly. Stakeholders also expressed a preference for AEMO to own and operate with a balanced approach to oversight, and we'll explore these in the later slides. Submissions also helped us to identify areas where further exploration is required, such as preferred funding model, data governance arrangements, and this will be refined and further consulted on throughout the remainder of the co-design process. Over the next two slides, I'll dive into the next level down of detail on stakeholder sentiment across key areas, whereby the dots are representing anonymised stakeholder submissions. I'll move reasonably quickly through this point because we will revisit these diagrams in the later slides in greater detail. So as we can see, for owner and operator, oversight and leveraging existing, the tight grouping of dots suggests that we've reached a moderate consensus across these areas. But you can see for cost recovery model, we've got a spread of preferences, which indicates that further exploration and co-design is required. If we move on to the next slide, we can see that there's strong support for a narrow scope and implementation approach. So starting narrow, then scaling. There's also support for priority use cases, but we can see that there's mixed sentiments towards strategic use cases. We'll now explore the submissions feedback against the four key areas we mentioned before, being ownership, operations and oversight, data sharing capability, use case functionality and data governance in greater detail. I'll break down the feedback on ownership, operations and oversight, and then I'll pass over to Ed, who will speak to the latter three topics and then explain how this feedback will take us forward. In the consultation paper, we presented three ownership and operations models, which was the AEMO-led, the new independent government agency and an industry consortium. AEMO-led, as it suggests, was led by the National Energy Market Operator, who would own and operate. A new government agency would be set up for the second model, which would manage the exchange, ensuring impartiality and public accountability. For the last model, this would see an industry consortium responsible for the exchange ownership and operations. As we can see from the right-hand side diagram, stakeholders expressed a clear preference for AEMO to own and operate, with the new independent government agency being the second preference. Some of the reasons for this include preference to leveraging existing frameworks and expertise. Some stakeholders said that AEMO-led would be faster to implement, more cost-effective, but stakeholders did raise that this model might be inflexible. There might be a need to manage potential bias as well. As for the new independent government agency, stakeholders viewed this as most impartial and most consumer focused, but in establishing this new agency, stakeholders noted that it would be higher setup costs, potentially slower and potentially face bureaucratic challenges. As for the last model, the industry-led consortium, it was considered to be a more flexible approach and would foster innovation. However, it's less favourable due to concerns around potential commercial bias, and it would need a dependency on stringent regulatory safeguards to uphold the impartiality. If we now consider oversight, stakeholders were asked to consider the level of prescription that an exchange would have in undertaking sort of its everyday operations. So we presented a scale from highly prescriptive to highly discretionary principle-based approach. On the highly prescriptive, it was a model that would in general require detailed, often legalistic setting out of key aspects. And in this case, the exchange operator would have minimal discretion on how it performs its functions. On the other end of this, a high discretionary model might include an instrument to provide principle-based guidance for the exchange operator, and the exchange operator might be able to develop its own procedures. As we can see on the right-hand side, stakeholders express their preference for balanced oversight, with some stakeholders leaning towards more of the prescriptive over less. Some of the reasons for this was that a balanced approach would create stability, whilst providing the flexibility for the exchange to quickly adapt to new market conditions, and providing prescription where required for areas such as privacy protection and cybersecurity would ensure social license, but also providing discretion where appropriate to enable innovation. So overall, stakeholders were quite firm in their suggestion that robust oversight to ensure transparency, accountability and alignment to the NEO was very much important. There was a strong preference for significant industry-wide collaboration and decision-making, including customer representation throughout the future decision-making processes. As part of this oversight category, we also asked stakeholders to consider their preferred oversight body. So some stakeholders suggested that existing regulators like the AER would be best placed in light of the fact that the industry is already heavily regulated by the AER, and this would avoid additional overheads from the establishment of additional regulatory bodies. Others indicated that a new dedicated body would be necessary to ensure true independence. I'll now hand over to Ed to speak to data sharing capability. Thanks, Ed.
Thank you, Alex. For those of you who have just joined us recently, we're just going through the submission summary part of the webinar, and we do have a Q&A function here, so please feel free to enter your questions there as we go through. We don't have to wait till the end, but we will only answer the questions at the end. So let's go through the remainder of the areas that we have consulted on. So on the screen here, we are talking you through responses to data sharing capability. I'll start on the right-hand side of the screen first. They are the things that we have consulted on, but also suggestions from the stakeholders. So we have spent a fair bit of time working with stakeholders at both workshops and expert working group level on the essential capabilities. So they are information security, format standardization, data governance, access management, and platform interoperability. We've also talked a little bit about future or optional ones, the ones in the pink box down the bottom, advanced data validation, custom data formats, and real-time processing. So we did spend quite a bit of time working with stakeholders on that. And in the middle, there are a few things that stakeholders have suggested for us. So, for example, message receipting, confirmation, consent management, and ability to verify data. So with all that in mind, the feedback that we receive quite consistently, both in workshops and also through the submissions, is that we want consistent emphasis on essential foundation. So let's start small. Let's get on the essential foundation parts first, and then we need to maintain the flexibility for future expansion. We've also had very strong support on leveraging existing systems and standards. So it's a clear message from stakeholders: where possible, let's not start something new. Let's use what we've already got already in place. We did have a few submissions that talked about the need to align with and build upon AEMO's Industry Data Exchange Initiative. We do have a slide later on in this pack that will talk you through what that is if you're not familiar with it. And also we've had stakeholders said that the data exchange should act as a facilitator rather than processing and storing the data itself. Next slide, please. So beyond the capability of the exchange, we've also consulted on use cases. We are covering use cases over 2 slides. So we consulted on priority use cases, and we've also consulted on a list of strategic use cases. As you can see here on the right-hand side, the dot diagram, the majority of people who have submitted to the consult paper showing strong support for the 3 use cases. The 3 priority use cases being sharing network limits, supporting local network services, and also consistency standing data. Now, of all those 3 use cases, the consistency standing data received the strongest support. I think there is a fair bit of frustration, I think, to be fair to say, out there in the industry, where the consistent data would help a variety of organizations and consumers as well. We've also got strong support on sharing network limits. So in this instance, what we meant by is talking about the work that has been started a few years ago on dynamic export limits or potentially dynamic import limits in the future, but really sharing that with as many participants, not just participants in the NEM operating sense, but people who actually have a role in making CER integrated for consumers. We did have mixed views on local network services. I think some are suggesting that the market are too immature, and yeah, it's really contingent on addressing existing barriers. But overall, we did have strong support, and again, it's a fairly clear message from stakeholders to say that let's embark on the priority use case first. Let's learn, let's adapt before we expand further, which we, the project team, thought is very, very good advice. Next slide, please. We haven't listed the strategic use cases here, but I might go very quickly over them. So we had a few of them: grid data collaboration, flexibility services request, visibility of customer choices, and also portfolio data access in a streamlined way. They are all listed in the consultation paper if you want to find a little bit more about that. We also have a couple of use cases provided by CEC on CCIP OS testing and certification. Let me talk through the CCIP OS first. So this is, again, talking to existing work that are ongoing to both in implementing backstop mechanism, but also communicating dynamic export limits or dynamic operating envelopes to our customer CER devices. So this one has quite strong support to be added as a priority use case to the list. But all the other ones that I mentioned earlier, most stakeholders are either neutral or it's not as strong as the priority use cases. Again, it reinforces their general theme that let's start with the priority ones first. We can learn through them and apply that to future use cases. I want to just take this opportunity to also emphasize that the CER data exchange, all the functionalities, everything that we have consulted through is meant to be complementary to the existing work, not just in this space in network sharing. It's meant to support the industry broadly, and we're not replacing or duplicating any existing functions at all. Next slide, please. Data governance. So this one is worth spending a little bit of time on. Alex, in her slide, talked about oversight. Oversight and data governance are two different things in the project team's view. So oversight talk to the governance of the actual exchange as the actual entity itself. Here we are talking about a broader governance framework about data in general. We have provided 4 models in our consultation paper where we've consulted on whether the exchange operator itself should have a role in data governance. We've also looked at industry collaborative or industry association, an existing market body like the AER or AEMO to look at data governance, and also a new data governance authority. So these are all bodies that could potentially look at where data should go, where data sharing should go, data quality, how we manage that, what use cases come in, and so on. The majority of feedback favored combining the industry collaboration and an oversight from an established regulator. I think that reflects a lot of what we've heard through the workshop and as well in our bilateral discussion with some stakeholders. It is important for stakeholders who in many cases would need to be the party implementing any governance arrangement that they have regular, transparent engagement over time. There's also consistent feedback on the critical importance of data quality. So some of these we have already heard through workshop, but technical data validation, high quality data sharing are all very important. But importantly, I think a lot of submissions talked about data owners needing to remain accountable for the accuracy of information. Next one, please. So with what Alex and I have just taken you through, this slide provides a summary of how the various feedback have landed. So on the left-hand side in the green box are areas that have clear agreement by stakeholders. So priority use cases, the phased implementation. So let's not do it in one big bang. Let's take it one step at a time. Leveraging existing infrastructure, whether it be the AEMO industry data exchange or others, to reduce cost and speed up implementation, and AEMO-led ownership. So these four things have very clear support. In the middle and on the right-hand side are things that we would need to work on further in 2025. If I cover the yellow box for discussion, cost assessment, there's still a bit of debate around the need for more rigorous evaluation of cost and benefits. It is our plan to go through in 2025 a cost assessment of the preferred option, which we will talk to next. Governance model remains a topic of discussion as well. There are alternative models that have been proposed. There's been quite a lot of discussion about funding, both initial funding and ongoing funding as well. And a consistent theme from stakeholders that we need to align with broader reforms. So I'm pleased to say that all the work that we've done in the last 6 months, we have considered all the various reforms that are ongoing in train coming up have been top of mind of the project team. What that means is that we've still got a bit of co-design work to do next year. So on the right-hand side in the purple box, we've listed 4 key things that we will work with stakeholders on. I won't dwell on this too much because we do have a slide later on that talk to that, but suffice to say, we will need to work on the data governance framework, cost recovery, look at use case capabilities, and also the implementation roadmap. I think I'll hand over to Rachel now to cover the preferred option.
Thanks, Ed. Based on the submissions, the stakeholders have expressed a clear preference that the industry preferred option for a CER data exchange should be an AEMO owned and operated model, built on existing capabilities through the industry data exchange, focus on the priority use cases, start small, and then grow. This preference has come through very clearly throughout the consultation, and it best aligns with the stakeholder feedback we've heard so far. Our aim for 2025 is to build out these elements through the workstream. But as Ed just mentioned, there are still areas that we need to investigate through the co-design process. These include the data governance framework and the funding arrangements, and how this will work in that AEMO owned and operated environment, and which models will need to be applied. Along with the governance and funding, we will also develop an implementation roadmap that outlines the related reforms and regulatory enablers that are needed to be in place for a CER data exchange. These 4 elements best deliver the stakeholder preferences against the trade-offs and feedback that we heard across workshop 2. Next, I just want to touch on a brief overview of the industry data exchange for those who are not quite familiar with it. So the industry data exchange, otherwise known as IDX, received industry endorsement in March of 2024 and is currently proceeding with its implementation of the foundational phase. The business case was signed off by industry following a detailed stakeholder period with a broad range of stakeholders. IDX represents an efficient and unified implementation of the exchange capabilities and is supporting several reforms over the next 2 years. And it's designed to modernise and standardise data sharing across Australian energy markets by replacing the legacy systems. And it's currently being working through the wholesale and retail market use cases currently. In addition to supporting the AEMO to organisation data exchange, it also supports organisation to organisation data exchange, which is what we've been working through this co-design process. IDX will also be able to enable secure data exchange, flexible use cases. So this means that even though the project doesn't have any CER use cases yet, we've been able to validate with the team that the design has the capabilities to support what we've been working through this co-design process. and will also have the ability for scalable participation to support new energy markets and third-party organisations. At the moment, IDX is planning for a Q2 2026 launch and is currently working under the Mighty projects in AEMO. We've attached the IDX fact sheet that was part of our consultation paper, as well as the website for more information to this point. Building on the existing capability is important because that's what we heard from stakeholders. So we're happy to answer any questions you have about IDX further. I'll now pass it back to Ed to touch on our work plan for 2025 and go through all the next stages of the co-design process. Thanks, Ed.
Thanks, Rachel. Next slide, please. We can only put so many things on a slide, so we focus on 6 things, but there will probably be a lot more that we need to work on in 2025. I'll talk you through the top 3 boxes first. They are, what a better word, artifacts that we will need to produce at the end of this process. So what we will deliver is a high-level design report. So it's going to be a comprehensive document that talks through what the CER data exchange going to look like, the capability, the use cases, and because we've identified a preferred option, it will build upon how we work through the AEMO IDX capability. Supporting the high-level design report are 2 things, cost assessment and the implementation roadmap. So we will we'll do a cost evaluation of the preferred option. And at this stage, sharing with you openly, we're looking at IDX, what's already there, the capabilities that are available, and what do we need to build upon it to to extend the capability into a CER data exchange. We will not just only look at the cost to AEMO, we would also consider the cost to participants, both current market participants in the NEM perspective, but also others that we envisage would be using the data exchange. What we won't go through in the cost assessment is extending it to consider quite detailed, deep analysis of individual processes. So, for example, if you as a business need to perform certain function before you can share data, that's a cost that's part of your business, and we won't be considering that in the cost assessment. We will also rely on existing work that has been done in various projects and trials. There have been a number of cost-benefit analysis, number of trials that will talk to the benefits of that can be delivered through the integration process. Where possible, we will try and evaluate a counterfactual case as well. So we do have a preferred option, but we will look at a counterfactual case to do a compare and contrast. Moving on to implementation roadmap, the report will include a set of steps that we need to take to the next stage. As Rachel said quite early on, this has been a bit of a marathon journey. We've started with trials, we've gone through now to the high-level design level, and there is still a bit to go before I think the CER data exchange becomes a reality. So the implementation roadmap will look at how we expand capabilities over time, how we go through detailed design, implementation, and quite importantly, we need to go through what enabling reforms we need to have for this to become a reality as well. So there's a fair bit that we need to do to deliver those top 3 things. On the bottom half, I'll cover data governance and oversight. So we did hear quite a lot from stakeholders about the need to look at governance. So we will work with stakeholders on what arrangements we need for, firstly, the data exchange, but also robust data management practices. What does industry involvement mean, and what does access control mean? So we will start that through this process. But if I was to be open and sharing, I personally, I think that this would probably go beyond the CER data exchange process. It's one that needs a lot of industry feedback and co-design. Stakeholder engagement. We will continue to work with stakeholders, a broad range of stakeholders, including a public workshop in March 2025. The focus of our engagement will change a little bit given where the process of the project is. We would seek to engage with some of our market body colleagues, so for example the AER and the AEMC, on whether we need to have reforms, and if one of those bodies is going to take up the role of oversight, what that means for them. We also start working with key industry stakeholders on working out what those next steps in implementation will be. What we would like to emphasize here is that we're very much seeking to have all your feedback. The more feedback we receive from industry and everyone here, it gives us a better result. Lastly, on funding arrangement, nothing comes for free these days, so we do need to consider funding arrangements for the CER data exchange. And through the process so far, we have considered the initial establishment cost, or the need to have that, but also ongoing funding models. The funding for this one would be slightly different to your normal market-based their market processes, because the CER data exchange is intended to include not just market participants, but also other organizations who have a role in facilitating CER integration. So when we consider ongoing funding sources, we need to think about how those who are not market participants in that sense will be able to pay for their usage, and how we balance that with market fees. I just want to go back quickly to the initial establishment cost as well. We've had a fair bit of discussion even before the consultation paper with expert working group and those who attended the workshops on how much is this going to be and what's the best way to fund it. So we will go through again, just look at different options in 2025 and what that means. And we did have suggestions about potential government funding, potential grant funding to cover that initial establishment cost. So all of these options are open on the table, and we will work through with stakeholders on what's the best way to do this. Next slide, please. So here's a bit of a timeline for 2025. Currently, the project is scheduled to finish by the end of April. So if I have to work backwards, so we will publish the knowledge sharing report, we will publish the workshop summary report, and also the high-level design with a cost assessment and implementation roadmap. We will do one final webinar and a live Q&A before this process move on to the next stage. So this is by no means, come May, this is not the end of the CER data exchange process. It just moves to a different phase. Working backwards, we do plan to hold a in-person workshop, likely to be in early March and likely to be in Melbourne. So we'll welcome as many of you attending as possible. We are hoping that by that time we would be able to share a lot more detail about what the CER data exchange will look like. From all the things that we just talked about, funding mechanism, governance, oversight framework. So there's a fair bit of work to do before then. And right down the bottom, we've got a number of expert working group meetings that we have scheduled with the group that we have. And I will take this opportunity to thank those who are in the working group. And if you're here in this webinar, thank you, because they have been very, very helpful in testing the ideas that the project team has come up with in a very constructive way. I don't think we can get to where we are now without those testing. That's a big sort of very whirlwind tour of where we're up to, what we plan to do in the future. I might just pause now for breath and then hand over to Craig Chambers, who would be moderating the Q&A session for us. Before I hand over to Craig, just a reminder, so we've got the Q&A function open, and please put your questions there, and you can upvote questions. We will endeavour to take those that have most ticks, most thumbs up, and then we'll work down the list.
Okay, thanks,
you,
Ed.
Craig.
Thanks, Ed. And this is we've got another 20 minutes or so to answer some of your questions. I see that people have already put in responses into the Q&A section of the chat. I think a few people are liking the questions. If you can just press the button on the left-hand side of the chat, which is the upvote, that allows me just to sort by the upvote chats. I We'll start with John Sibley's question, which is, I might direct to Rachel or Nick from AEMO. Does the standing data priority relate to improving DR register reporting outcomes, or is it an alternative data collection mechanism proposed?
I'll take that one, Craig. Thanks for your question, John. So it's looking at, we'll need different standing data and the access to that different from what we have today. And how this needs to be implemented was kind of discussed through workshop 2. And one of the things we did here, as well as the consultation paper, identified that the DR register might be one of the ways that we need to do that. And it's still something we need to be discussed, because if it is the register, then broader access to stakeholders will be needed for that, which might need to be dealt with in another regulatory reform. So I'd say that in the implementation roadmap, it does look at the regulatory enablers for a CER data exchange and the use cases. So more of that will need to be worked through with stakeholders as well.
I'll just add on there, John. So because I know you'll probably want specific things. So some of the things like, there are assets that aren't included in that register today, EVs, controlled loads, that kind of thing. Some of the ideas from stakeholders are that if you have broader access to a more complete standing data set, you may be able to avoid sort of manual registration processes, and there's efficiencies there. There's also ideas around, when you have firmware updates and some kind of register helping with checking that, inverters and devices are still compliant with, grid protection standards and that sort of thing. So there's some of the ideas that have come through. As Rach said, how that use case is sort of included in high level design and how it gets implemented is what we're going to work through next, but that's what we've heard on that use case. Hopefully that's helpful.
Thanks, Nick. Okay, so Oren has a question regarding IDX. I'll paraphrase. So she's, I think, interested in getting further detail around the IDX architecture. I think she was asking, and apparently a few submissions were asking for further information about IDX and how it would integrate into this, and what the status of the business case. She's, I think, looking for feedback, was not included in the summary paper of the consultation, nor in this webinar. So as we go into the high level design and the next phase of the consultation, how will this information be provided? This is probably directed again to you, Rachel or Nick, please.
Yeah, perfect. Oren, thanks for your question. So the IDX team is now working through the technical design that's due in March of next year. So they're working with the Mighty working group through workshops to go. It will be released via the Mighty page as it continues.
I think that Mighty working group, Oren, has representation from a lot of market participants. So I dare say your organisation will be there as well. So there's probably someone in your organisation that has quite a bit of information on it and has been along the journey. So we can send you links, but yeah, there's probably someone internally that'll be able to help you with that a bit more as well.
Okay, I think she's also asking for more information, because it sounds like that number of people in this forum haven't been part of that. So maybe that's something we need to take away as an action, just to provide more information. So thanks for that question, Oren. We'll endeavour to provide you more information there. Okay, the next one is from Bryn Williams. Phase 3 priority areas, slide 27. Should the cost assessment not be a cost-benefit analysis assessment to confirm, once costs are better understood, that the investment is enabling the priority use cases will deliver positive benefits for customers versus the counterfactual? Can someone, maybe that's for you, Ed, you've talked a little bit about this. Do you want to comment further on that?
Yeah, I'll start, and happy for other team members to join in as well. I think the short answer is no. We won't be doing a cost-benefit analysis in that strict sense, where we would quantitatively map benefits and cost. we will look at the cost aspect of it. As we said before, nothing is free, and we want to make sure that we understand the magnitude that we are asking industry to take on. So we will look at it from that lens. There are, I think, through all of the many of the trials have talked about the benefits in CER integration, and in particular having an exchange type arrangement so that information can be shared quite efficiently with each other. I think it is difficult to try and justify or go through benefits in that sense for a specific piece of the CER integration puzzle. Nick and Rachel?
I think the bit I'd just add onto that is there is counterfactual in that assessment, Bryn. So, the whole concept of this project is to reduce duplication and make things more streamlined and efficient. So, there'll be an assessment of, how would these use cases look like in a streamlined world versus not. But all of these things are part of the next year in the project, where cost assessment and what that looks like will be talked through with the expert working group, as well as in workshop 3. So, this is still very much part of the co-design process.
Okay, so the next question is from Jill Caney. Doesn't the NEM 2025 declared project, $350 million covering Mighty, which includes IDX and the DR data exchange, market participants being asked to pay twice for the data exchange? I might ask you, Rachel, to respond to that one, given you did talk about that in your slide.
Yeah, it wouldn't be double costed, Jill, but look to be recovered under the DER Data Hub initially that already has a business case to it as well.
So, Jill, I think that's in the roadmap as, like we've seen in some of these use cases, the need for uplifting existing sort of market systems to facilitate CR use cases. That's what that initiative is there for. What this project's doing in terms of co-design is putting more meat on the bones. And so there's a vehicle there to access some funding that's already been sort of set aside. So no, it's not asking for duplication. It's just more making more clear some reform that we thought might need to happen anyway. And building on existing investments, like you say, the IDX and the IDAM and other parts of the Mighty program. So very much looking to be as efficient as possible there.
Thanks, Nick. Okay, so the next one's from Darren Glavman. Will the cost assessment consider cost to industry? Not details of cost for each company, but in the sense that same design choices will add more to the system or consumers' cost than others. Ed, I think you did mention that in your presentation. Do you want to take that one?
Yeah, I think I understand what you're trying to get to, Darren. Short answer is yes, we will consider cost to industry. So few aspects we're looking at the cost that AEMO would need to incur in building the exchange, but also the costs for parties, not just market participants, but parties who want to access the exchange, the integration cost. But I think your bracketed words are correct. We're not going to go into specific detailed costs for each company.
I think where Darren's going with that question is different design choices might have different impacts to industry. So I think that's where he's going with that question.
At the high level, for the purpose of the high level design, we will look at a counterfactual, but I think with all of these infrastructure type projects, the further you develop the project, the better certainty that you know in what design choices and what technology choices that you choose. I won't speak for AEMO, but I think the plan is, there are a few stages that will need to go yet, and there would need to be cost consideration as we progress further and have more clarity.
Okay, thanks, Ed. So next one's from Stephanie Bashir. For transparency, when you say the business case was signed off, I think this is referring to IDX, but I'm not quite sure. Can the information be made public? Since the case did not include the specifics, will you be undertaking another detailed business case to ensure that there are benefits and how these are actually going to flow to consumers, especially that I imagine this to be a high capex IT investment by AEMO and others?
Hi, Stephanie. The IDX business case is available on the AEMO website. It was made public when it was endorsed in March of 2024, with industry agreeing to it, so all the information can be found there.
Okay, thanks, Rachel. So keep putting your questions in. So the next one's from Tim. I'll take this as probably more of a statement than a question, calling it the Controlled Energy Resource Data Exchange. I think we've made that point many times throughout this process. There's no intent for any devices to be controlled through this exchange. So I'll take that as more of a statement than a question. Next one from John Sibley. What is the scope of the network constraints exchange priority, e.g. real-time, long-run forecasts, and what system level, what audiences, etc.? If this one, Anoop, maybe you could help respond to this one.
Sorry, Craig.
I think the question is around what is the scope of the network constraints use case. There was a one of the priority use cases was sharing network limits beyond what is already done to provide additional benefits. So you could talk more to that.
Yeah, sure. So that use case is really around as we move increasingly to things like flexible export limits, being able to, and not to mention emergency backstop sort of related controls, that use case relates to other customer agents seeing value on behalf of the customer in having access to that information so they can better forecast and manage customer assets. So that's sort of what that's about broadly.
Thanks, Anoop. Okay, so next one from Tim. I think this one has been asked previously. So all the costs are eventually going to go to consumers. Where's the assessment for the consumer benefit and burden? Ed, do you have anything additional to add there?
Yes. I think I've said when I was presenting the slides that with a lot of these integration work, there will come a cost. I don't think we're shying away from additional cost. What we do need to consider in all sorts of reforms, whether it be data exchange or broad CER, is that there is a cost involved already if we don't do anything. If we stick with current processes, current system, there is a cost involved. What we have committed to look at here in this process is the cost of building the exchange so that we have a clearer understanding on what that impost is going to be. We have also been in discussions with ARENA and also in our briefings to government that we have expressed to them there is desire from the industry and quite a few submissions that the initial setup costs government should consider whether they could support that because there's a real benefits in there in providing that to facilitating the consumers. And just on the benefit parts, this is part of a future backbone for the CER, high CER system. I think I lose count of the number of webinars, seminars that we've all been to that talked about the need for efficient data exchange, everyone working together, sharing data so that we can integrate CER better. So a lot of those benefits are very difficult to quantify. And having been an economist myself and looked at and commissioned a number of cost benefit analysis, with a lot of these infrastructure builder costs are very easy to put down because you're talking about building nuts and bolts, but the benefits are very difficult to put in a dollar term. I think enough discussions, enough debates been on about the benefit of doing that. I think this is all about finding a least cost option.
Okay, we've only got a few minutes left. I'll whip through a few others with what time we've got. So Kristen just asked, can you share who's on the working group? The logos of those organisations have been presented in previous forums and are on the AEMO website. I think there's 20 odd people that are on that. We can share the organisations that are represented on that. Next one from Stephanie Bashir, seeing as industry and consumers are footing the bill, it will be important that information, discussions and submissions are made available. This includes if there are benefits, how they will flow to consumers, especially that they will end up paying for this in the end. Rachel, do you want to answer this one?
Yeah, perfect. Thanks, Craig. Stephanie, all of the submissions are now publicly available on our website, as well as the summary report that you can find there. And they walk through all of the different cost assessments that they'd like to see as well.
Okay, so the next one might be our last one, is from Oren. How do you ensure that throughout the next steps, the outcomes of this process, the CER data exchange process, and the outcomes of the National CER Roadmap, packages 5, will be aligned? Ed, do you want to answer that one?
Yep. I think it's worth just reminding ourselves that this project is actually part of the CER roadmap. It's one of the projects in there. It is a big program of work that we have in front of us, and different parties doing different parts. So what we have been doing is, in addition to the workshops, the expert working groups, we have been talking to various government departments and bodies that are responsible for different parts of the roadmap to make sure that A, they are aware of what we're doing, what we're up to, and B, that we haven't gone and done something that is not aligned with what they plan to do. So yes, we will make sure that we do that and do our best to talk to as many of our colleagues who are involved in that process as possible.
Okay, well, Ed, I might hand back to you, but before I do, we will take a copy of all these questions and look to answer some of those into next year. Remembering we've got a few months into Easter next year to have another workshop, multiple working group meetings, and look to answer a lot of these questions, but we'll take a copy of all those and look to consult with you next year. So with that, I'll hand back to you, Ed.
Thank you. And I just want to take the opportunity to thank all of you today coming to the webinar. And for those of you who are still here and are part of the expert working group and those who have attended the workshop, just want to say thank you. Santa has a few CER items on the sleigh here. Wishing you all a good end to the year and Merry Christmas, and we'll see you in 2025.